I got your swings up here, and you got a lot of great stuff going on in your swing, and it's a couple small major things that are holding you back. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And I mean, you're welcome to ask any questions that you want, or do you want me to walk through your swing first and show you what I was talking about?
Well, yeah, well, the first thing I'd just like to say is it's frustrating because I get everything that you say and I love it. Obviously, I think there's probably a different type of mentality that people that are attracted to this type of your training, which is technical, which is the way I think, analytical. So I get what you're saying. I'm doing the dead drill. I'm doing all the things, but it's just not translating to the club. And I think a lot of it could be with my takeaway. One thing that you said that really hit home is how you get there is so important. And you can look perfect on the top of your backswing, but if you didn't get there the right way, it doesn't matter. And so that's where I think when I'm doing the dead drill, I'm doing it maybe the right way. When I get that club there, like something I'm lifting up, because one thing I'll try to do sometimes is I feel like I get kind of stuck, I know I kind of push off my right heel. So I'm trying to take it out a little bit more instead of so far in, which I know is just all you just want to move from the big parts because that's all a byproduct of moving by the right way. But something's holding me back, and that's where I'm obviously right hand dominant, so I've tried to move my right hand under a little bit more, which I had in review, more axis tilt, and then also for some reason I got in my mind I'm supposed to let the club head start rotating, which I thought was going to help subdue my right side and put more power in the lead arm. But then I would notice I'm wide open right here. So I'm trying to get it back to square, but so I'm sure you're seeing all this stuff, but that's just kind of high level where my mind is.
Yeah. So all that is, when people get caught up in that type of stuff, in my opinion, they're kind of chasing their tail around in circles, looking at the wrong stuff. But you hit on the nail on the head, is that there's something dysfunctional going on with the bigger moving parts when we start chasing these smaller things with the club. And it's not that the club and the arms and the takeaway and all that stuff is important, but the reality is when you're loading up correctly, that stuff truly does fall into place very naturally, because it wouldn't make sense for you to do what you're doing with your arms if your body was loaded up correctly. And that's really the key. And once you start to really, and that's honestly, it's the hardest part for most people to get, because it's the part of golf that you don't focus on, you don't see it, you don't really understand it. And so that's actually, I'm completely redoing a lot of the videos, and I'm bringing in a $21,000 force plate to just for the videos for the lessons. What's that?
What's a force plate?
So a force plate it'll be here in the studio. It goes on the ground and it measures what's going on in your body that you can't see. Now I can see it because I've spent so many years looking at thousands and thousands of swings that it's easy for me to look at it in slow-mo video and make very good educated guesses on what's happening with the pressures. But as an amateur golfer, it's not realistic for you to understand what those forces are. And when you see it in real quantifiable analytical data that's inarguable, right? It's like, this is what you're doing. You cannot lie. It doesn't matter what it looks like on camera. Here's what's really happening with the interaction with the ground. That's what is really going to help people understand what's really happening with the swing, because you start seeing things like where the takeaway is going. And I can look at it and say, well, your weight is going here and it's X%. And that's why the club is doing this. It's a counterbalancing, right? I can see that on video and I can make sense of it. You may not recognize that, but when you see what's going on with your feet and what's actually truly happening with the interaction with the ground, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, holy crap, I had no idea. So, but now these things are super expensive, so it's not like you're going to go and run and throw one out in your garage. But as I start explaining these in video and start showing what happens and showing what's happening with students so that you recognize it in your own swing, then it's going to start to click. But it'll be here in a few weeks. I'm very excited about doing some of these content with it, but it'll help you too with what I was seeing in your swing, because you're kind of chasing things that really are symptoms of an underlying cause. And that's what I really want to deep dive into with you, is talk about what those real things are in your swing. because honestly, the takeaway and all that stuff, it doesn't matter that much if you're moving your trunk correctly, if you're interacting with the feet, with the ground, with your legs correctly. And
Right.
that's all that's going on in your swing. Does that make sense?
That's great. That sounds great. Yeah, like even that makes sense too what you're talking about, because the other reviewer said, okay, the dump truck drill, those things, they all help. I get it intuitively, but I get out there and the more I try to move, like then I'm coming in really, really, I'm losing my posture. I know I'm pushing off my right foot, but for some reason I just can't stop it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
100%.
it's
That happens so often. And that's where this type of technology that, before I used to use a force plate years, like 10, 12, 15 years ago, I had one. But back then it was really hard to make sense of this data because they were only in one dimension. They only measured vertical force, right? How hard you pushed into the ground.
right.
But the other thing about that is, okay, I'm seeing that I have 700 PSI or whatever, but what does that mean? Is that good or is that bad? Well, now with this technology's evolved so much, we can see what so many tour pros do and how they're creating these ground forces. And we can see the direct correlations. I was just ahead of my time, I guess, starting to want to study this. Now all these other people have jumped on the bandwagon, but it's great because now we have a huge adoption. There's way more study going into it. So now we can see, Matthew Wolf, we know exactly how much force he's creating at impact during the transition at every single it's 1,000 hertz. So it's measuring 1,000 frames per second. So it's very black and white, which is how I love to do things. Like, this is how it is. This is what's really happening. You can't argue it, right? So,
Exactly.
and that stuff really, when you look at what the tour pros do, and I've always argued that, rotary swing is the fundamentals of what the pros all do the same. It's what makes them pros. Now we can see what's really happening in those fundamentals. Everybody gets hung up on, oh, my arm's here, the club's here, takeaway's there. Like, I like that stuff, but it really doesn't matter. I mean, you can do a lot of goofy stuff in the backswing, but it's the way that you use your big muscles that separates the pros from everybody else. And now we have this data to prove it. The stuff that I've been saying for 15 years, looking at it on video, now I can say, here is exactly what's really happening with your feet, with the legs, with the ground. The video I did many years ago, if you hit the ball with your legs, a lot of people are like, yeah, but what does that really mean? And now we can show unequivocally there's a direct correlation to vertical ground force, how hard you push into the ground with your lead leg, and club head speed. And it's inarguable, right? So that's what's super cool stuff that's coming on down the line, because it'll help people like you who have a really good golf swing, but you're just missing a couple really key things that you wouldn't really think are that important. And in the past, it's not like if you look at a video in 2 dimensions of your swing, you can't really tell how much you're pushing into the ground or how much you're using your hips for rotation or all that stuff. But now you'll start to realize how important that is. But right now you might be, hitting a ball and you might be like, you could be on a frozen pond and it wouldn't really make any difference. A really powerful player is going to smash into the ground. It's going to seem so different, but you can't really, most people aren't going to recognize that, right? And you're not going to recognize it in your own swing.
Well, that's why I paid up for Chuck Whitten. But know that you're going to see that nuance that the other guys, I'm sure that everything they tell me is right, but there's just something I'm missing. Big, I'm sure.
It's a couple little things, but they're fundamentally groundbreaking. I mean, they're fundamentally game changing for you, right? Because you have so many great things going on. But if you don't understand how to load your legs really right and understand what they really do and how to truly use the ground, then none of this stuff will ever really work. It may look really pretty. It may look okay, but it doesn't produce the results, right? And that's all that really matters at the end of the day. And the way that you get those results, the way that you get this real effortless power, the way that I hit the ball, the way that I do is my legs are working way harder than it looks like on video, right? So I'm like 170 pounds, but during the transition and just before impact, I'm creating like almost 400 pounds of force under my left leg. So I'm more than doubling my body weight, right? That's stuff that you see my legs straightening up, but what does that really mean, right? But without this, my whole swing doesn't work. Without that vertical drive, without me pushing into the ground that hard, I can't release the club. And if I can't release the club right with my legs, then I have to start using my arms, and nothing will ever change that, right?
The constant battle of your mind trying to hit the ball where you want it to go versus what your body's doing.
Exactly. So that's the stuff I want to talk to you about in your swing. I want to walk through it and show you these little things where your lower body is just not quite doing what we need it to do, because the rest of the stuff is fine. Like, you can play great golf from where you are, but you can't if you don't have the right power sources in place. Because if you don't have, this is why I'm sure you've heard this and even probably felt it in your own swing. You make a practice swing and it just feels perfect, right?
Yeah.
And then you step up over the damn ball and you're like, it's like an octopus falling out of a tree kind of thing. You're like, what the hell happened? And it's always the same stuff. If you don't feel subconsciously that you have efficient power coming from somewhere, you will try and make up for it somewhere else. You cannot override your subconscious, right? It's like, dude, I know that you think I can hit this 7-iron this far, but I need to go after it because I don't feel that I really have the oomph to get behind it. And 99% of the time, it's just legs. It's not using the ground, not using the legs correctly. And so the arms have to take over. And so no matter what you tell yourself, like, oh, I got to keep this, one of the things I do all the time is people's right arm collapses really early in the swing. And they're like, I tell myself to keep it straight and I just can't. Why can't I do it? And I'm like, if you kept your right arm straight, swinging the way that you are, loading your body the way that you are, you would powder puff it. It wouldn't go anywhere. You need to do this. This is a good compensation for your movement patterns, right?
That's so key. That's so key right there.
Yeah. So in your case, like I said, you got a wonderful swing, but there's a couple big building blocks that are out of whack. And once you understand and I get you to feel what that feels like, you're going to kind of have a eureka moment like, oh, I definitely am not doing this. This feels radically different. So that's what I want to walk you through. So let me get your swing up here, and we'll do the face on with the iron first that you sent in.
Yep.
Because that's a good place to start. All right. So one thing that you're going to notice, and this is really typical. Can you see the screen here?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So a little tiny bit of a weak right hand, tiny bit. But what I see here is two things. One, even at setup, your legs look pretty passive to me.
Yeah.
They're not really awake. And your right hand weakness tends to lead to a right hand push, because you need to do that to rotate the face to help square it coming down.
By weak, my hand's too far on top, my right hand's too far on top.
Yeah, just twist it a little bit this way. So this line is just going kind of up towards this side of your head, and it should be going, this thumb and forefinger line will go a little bit more through the forearm. So even just something as minor as this leads to a right hand push, okay?
No, sorry, my right hand that V should point more to my right shoulder.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Just a small amount, but this seems like innocuous, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm clocking this thing like 5 degrees.
Very right hand dominant there for sure with weak legs.
And that's what happens, right? And that's exactly what's happening in your swing. If you didn't start to use that right hand coming down, you wouldn't square the face. So now the problem is you're not only chasing the club face, but you're chasing a power loss, and they go together. You have to drive and push with that right hand, or you wouldn't square the face. But now, because you're having to push with the right hand, you're losing power because you're dominating the swing with the right side. So small little details like this really start to stack up. And in your case, that's one little thing that we need to make a change on.
Okay.
But it's a minor thing, but it does add up. So now as we go back, now look at your right hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's extremely weak, right? Now we're screwed, because now this right hand is now pointed at your left shoulder, give or take a little bit, right? So the right hand is so twisted on top of the club, and you didn't start out like that. You started out decent, a little bit off, and then subconsciously, before you took it back, you re-gripped the club, and now we're in trouble. Because if you don't dominate with the right hand coming down, there's a 0% chance of squaring that club face up. But more importantly, what's going on is it's forcing you to be right side dominant, so the left side can't do what it needs to do. And the left arm is so much more important for squaring the club face and releasing the club than the right hand is. And you've just power shifted. You've given the right hand control and you've told the left side to take a nap. And so now we're in trouble.
Which is maybe why I tried to rotate the club more open on the backswing, and it helped for a little bit of time, trying to, you know, open it up and try to get that left side back engaged. But,
yeah, but you were doing it with the right hand.
right.
So that won't work. We have to get the body in the left arm to take over here, but we're going to get there. So now as we go back, lower body not loaded up here, right? And this is the big difference. We need to start to wake up your lower body a big time. And we're going to do a lot of different stuff or a couple of simple drills for that, but I'm going to just kind of walk you through the whole thing first. So now right hand, you know, we know it was very, very, very weak. So now what we're going to tend to have happen is the right hand's going to want to push and late in the swing right there. And you see how your left arm's breaking down here?
Yeah.
And the right hand is now working really hard in a counterclockwise motion, like you're unscrewing a screw with a screwdriver to get that club face to square up. If you didn't do this, you'd block it a mile right.
Which I can do.
Yeah, if you don't get really aggressive with if you just told yourself, you know, be all left hand, it wouldn't work, right? So, and you see the right knee kicked in towards the left, and the left leg is kind of bent here.
Yeah.
These are all right side dominant traits. Okay, that's all that's going on, and we set ourselves up from setup to be right side dominant, and we didn't really give ourselves a chance to do anything correctly with our lower body. We didn't load the lower body up correctly going back, and then we didn't use the left side coming down. We had to use the right side because we told our brain that's what we were going to do immediately off the ball. Yep. Now let me pull up the quickly the down the line view, and then we're gonna start jamming on this.
Yeah, you can see how, I mean, my long games can be pretty decent sometimes, but then I can't hit a wedge because I'll either hit it fat or thin with that right hand coming through, so I can't score.
Exactly, yeah. So as we go back, you know, the right hand, like I said, it's an issue.
Yeah.
What I really want to see is how are you using your legs? And right here, your left knee needs to come forward more, all the way out towards the edge of your shoe. So that's another 3 inches.
So one of the guys told me not to have that gap that you can see between my 2 knees.
Yep, exactly. And that gap is different. I'm going to show you what's going on there.
So
we don't want to see
my left knee a little bit.
We don't want to see a huge gap there, but that has a lot to do with your setup and where the right leg's going as well in the backswing. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. So, you know, left wrist cup, this is going to be, you know, again, we're going to be right hand dominant coming down. So we're going to struggle a little bit with timing. But the biggest issue here is that you're not rotating your hips in a way that's going to load them. That's what I want to start to focus on. And that's pretty easy to see when the belt line looks relatively, it's not, I can't really see the left hip. It should be tilted down more and rotated more. And that will happen when you let this left knee come forward a little bit more. And I'll walk you through all this stuff. So then as we come down, because the lower body isn't quite working as well as it needs to, you do a great job with the transition as best as you can. But as now we're a little bit stuck here. And then we got just a tiny little, you know, that right hand flip twist in there. But you can see the right side is kind of driving here and the left leg's not getting posted up. Yeah. That left leg will not post up if you don't load it during the transition. And it can't get loaded. I'm going to start to walk you through all this stuff. It can't get loaded during the transition magically. It has to be told what it needs to do during the backswing so that it can work in the downswing. So what you're doing right now is barely letting the hips turn. The right hip's going back, but the left hip's kind of just staying in place. It's this, where this left knee is coming forward, and if anything, you're going to feel like your spine angle would be slightly going down more, and the hip's going back a little bit. So you'll see, if I do this, and I really overcook it, and I go like this, which is what we see a lot, and this right leg straightens up, that's when we see that giant gap there, right? That's what we don't want to see. And that's a byproduct of people just not loading the right leg, and they let this right leg hyperextend going back, and then this doesn't do us any good. This doesn't work, right? So as you're going back, if you're maintaining some flexion here, it's okay for this to straighten up a little bit. But what's more important is that this hip's going back and feeling that right glute begin to load, and this left knee is coming forward. The reason this needs to happen is that as this comes forward and I tilt, it makes weight shift almost automatic. Right? Because I'm just kind of falling, I'm sitting into my left leg.
It's interesting there too. It's not a reverse pivot.
Well, it would be a reverse pivot if I didn't shift to the right first. Right? So if I just did this, I would be reverse pivoting, right? But instead, immediately off the ball, there's a little bump, right? I'm shifting while I'm beginning to turn. So you can see that even though this left knee has come forward, I'm not reverse pivoting here by any means. What I'm doing though is getting that left leg so that I can just kind of use gravity to help me shift over. So now this left leg is really loaded. Yeah. Whereas right now, your left leg in the backswing isn't really loaded at all. And during the transition, it's more the right side. And that's why your left leg is still kind of bent at impact and kind of getting beat up by the right. Your right side's doing a great job. The left side's doing 10% of what it needs to. So what we're going to focus on is a little bump to the right and turn, let the belt go down, shift. And what you're really trying to do is create pressure. Think about how much force you can create under this left foot to the point that you would literally jump up in the air off one foot. That's how much force you want to be able to create at peak under that left leg. If you don't feel like you can ever jump off that left leg, there's not nearly enough load over there. Not that you need to do that, right? Sure. But you see in all the long drive guys, none of them have their left foot on the ground at impact, right? It may be like this, but they're all jumping up in the air. That should tell you something, right? Like the guys who are hitting it the longest create the most vertical force. What you're doing is lateral, right? You're pushing off the right and a little bit of rotation, but there's three forces, right? We have lateral, we have rotational, and we have vertical. You need those. In most tour pros, there's kind of like a range that they all kind of tend to fall in. If we put you on that force plate I was talking about, you would see a lot of lateral force, a low level of rotational, and a very low vertical. Yeah. There's 100% direct correlation to vertical ground force and clubhead speed, okay? So without getting it loaded during the transition and posting up in the downswing, you're costing yourself a ton of power. And this is, again, it's quantifiable. You cannot deny that. Not that you have to have a massive amount of vertical force, but there's a range that the PGA Tour player is consistently all around this area, and the longest hitters are always at the top end of that range. And amateur golfers tend to do what you're doing. They either tend to rotate. This is the really high handicap. You're not going to do this, right? But you've seen this guy, right? You know, just kind of just spinning their hips. That doesn't work. You've seen the guy who just does the lateral. That doesn't work, right? So it's understanding how to put these together in a combination that's going to create force. But the reason that all of the stuff that's causing you trouble is that you're very low on the rotational force and very, very low on the vertical force. Yep. And that's what we need to get. And then your arms can start to chill out. Then you'll realize, hell, it doesn't really matter where my arms go because they're relaxed during most of the swing anyway. What I'm really trying to do is wake up my legs and get my legs to be really peaking early, right? Like by the time that your left arm, is a simple way to think about this. It's not exactly 100% accurate, but it's a good way to think about it. By the time that your left arm is parallel to the ground in the backswing, you want to be maximum load on the right already, right? What you tend to do is go all the way to the top and you still haven't shifted back to the left. You know that that whole downswing is happening in a quarter of a second. There's no chance in hell that you're going to get all of this left hip stuff done if you haven't begun to shift by the time that your left arm is parallel to the ground. It just won't work. So when invariably, that's when the arms start taking over because the hips are late. They're late to the party. They haven't gotten out of the way. They haven't gotten loaded. And so you will always, always have to use your arms to begin to try and swing the club. And that's where people get frustrated. They're like, gosh, no matter what I do, my arms have to take over. I'm like, yeah, of course, because if you take out your arms, which is your primary power source, and you don't replace it with anything else, then you have no power, right? Yep. So what I want you to start to think about is that off the ball, boom, we're trying to create force immediately on that right, so that by the time I'm here, I'm already starting to get back to the left. And that will keep you from over rotating your hips and getting that big gap, because you're already shifting back the other way. And then by the time I'm in the downswing, by the time my left arm is parallel to the ground, I'm creating a very high amount of force in the left leg, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you think about that, it's just as, again, it's not 100%, but if you just kind of use that as a checkpoint, 100, very high peak force here on the right, very high peak force here on the left, and then just focus on posting up and creating that vertical force, then you'll realize by the time that you could even use your arms, you're already at impact. Your arms have just been whipped down and pulled down by the big muscles in your trunk. Does that make sense?
Makes a ton of sense. It's exactly right. I know it's right.
So,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
At one point, maybe address to the club face, how quickly it opens up on takeaway. Because I've been trying to do this, and I see, okay, well, it's very subtle. Because before I was obviously trying to over-rotate it a little bit like this. And so when I'm going back, and I look at Tiger and stuff, and it looks like the club head, when his arms at parallel to the ground, his club head is almost kind of like parallel to his spine. It still looks a little closed, potentially, and then I guess it opens up. Not even opens up. That's the wrong word, I know, but like how does that rotate?
So I'll give you two answers to that question. First of all, what Tiger's doing now is a Sean Foley hangover. I don't necessarily agree with what he's doing there. It's not a big deal either way, to be honest with you. The club face, I like to see it a little bit closer to toed up, slightly toed in, but not matching the spine angle. But the reason that when you have a club face that's more closed during the backswing, it inherently steepens the swing plane, okay? Not necessarily a good or bad thing. It just depends on what you're trying to do with your swing plane. Tiger was trying to get himself, and what Foley was doing, was trying to get himself to hit a cut as a predominant shot, right? So he would aim, especially when he was like really working through his stuff with Foley back in the day, like 2011, 2012. You would watch him, if the fairway's over here, he's aiming over here and trying to hit these giant cuts. When you have the face that is relatively closed, there's not much rotation in it in the backswing. Not only does it inherently steepen the swing plane, which can make hitting a cut easier than a shallow swing plane, right? But it also, it takes out the inherent rotation of the face. If you swung really flat, right? So if I just stood here and swung parallel to the ground, well, the club face is going to naturally want to rotate a lot, right? It's going to go 90 degrees to 90 degrees. Now, if I swung straight up and down, there's no inherent rotation, right? So what they're trying to do, if you're trying to hit a cut, it's kind of ironic. Most people don't really understand this, but a better player, like if I'm trying to hit a draw, I actually rotate the face more. And if I'm trying to hit a cut, I rotate the face less in the backswing.
Okay.
Because what I'm doing is I'm building in inherent rotation. I want the club face, if I'm trying to hit a draw, to naturally want to shut on the way down. And if I'm trying to hit a cut, I'm going to hold the club face back shut, even though it's counterintuitive. Again, golf is just the opposite. Just do the opposite of what you think is right. Right? You're
not adjusting your plane to do that. You're actually changing your rotation.
Club face angle, yeah, exactly. So and now by default though, by me holding the club face more shut, and again, we're talking only a few degrees here, but by me holding the club face more shut, the club face will naturally be steep, or the swing plane will naturally be slightly steeper, which makes it easier for me to swing left and hold off the release of the face. Right. Now, as I add rotation, I'm going to exaggerate this so it's easier to see. As I begin to rotate the face, it makes it really natural for me to swing shallower. So then it makes it very easy for the club to naturally want to rotate like it does when you swing horizontal to the ground. Does that make sense?
It does. So it seems like looking at my swing, that wasn't something that really struck you. It's much more about the body movement. And
yeah, so that was my second answer. So I said I was going to give you two answers to that. One, that was a little bit longer explanation than I plan on giving you. But the second answer is, I don't really care. And you don't need to really care. What you need to focus on and put 100% of your mental energy into is what your legs and trunk are doing first. And then what will naturally happen as you start to realize how much more power you have available to you now from your legs, you'll realize that it doesn't really matter where the club goes. It doesn't matter what the club face is doing as much. But when you're trying to use all hands and trying to time the release with this twisting of the right hand, then the club face matters a lot,
Yeah.
right? But once you begin to use centripetal and centrifugal force in your swing, which you can only do by using your legs to create rotation, the only way to do it efficiently anyway, then the club's naturally going to want to swing. And the softer you keep your arms and the less you start trying to interfere with what that club's naturally wanting to do in the swing, the more consistent you'll naturally become. So what I'd rather you do is focus first on getting your lower body to work correctly. Start using the ground, start using your legs and your hips for force. And then we can tweak club face angle, swing plane, position at the top for a desirable ball flight. But that's secondary, way secondary to this. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
So I want to spend a few minutes while I have you just kind of getting your lower body starting to work so that I can kind of show you what we're talking about and so you can start to feel it. So the first thing I'd like to see, just throw the club down. We don't need that for a second. What I'd like to see you do is start to work on that first move of shifting into that right, beginning to load the right hip and turning it back, creating that, there you go. Letting the left knee come forward, letting it come forward out over the toe, and you should feel a lot more load going back. There you go. See, the gap between your legs is very small, and realistically, you'd already be shifting back to the left at that point.
I can see, like, I'm basically right there now to the left side.
Yeah.
To just push right up and do that clamshell drill.
Exactly. That's what I want you to start to work on is, the right hip's going back, then both butt cheeks are on the chair, and then the left hip's going back even further as you push the foot into the ground to create that vertical force. And you're also pushing the hip back to create some rotational force.
I think it's funny because I've been trying to rotate my hips more, but it's not, like you say, you feel like you're doing it, but you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I really need to feel like that thing is getting back there early. Like you said, when the club is here, I'm already loaded.
Exactly.
And then from there, just.
So you're now locking your right knee in place in the backswing. It's going to come back forward like it did before. Like you did this really well. You can use the right side to help you shift back to the left a little bit. I'm really nervous about that with most high handicap or amateur golfers because they just do this and then they start driving really hard and they hurt their hip and they get this big reverse C and they hurt the lower back. But there is some pushing force that you can use as long as you're using the left side as the dominant force. If you're just driving super hard off the right, you'll shift too far. But if your left leg is loaded and that is allowing you to push into the ground and decelerate the hips and rotate the hips back, then you can use the right hip to help speed everything up. So I always tell people the left side is in control, the right side's just helping speed it up. And as long as
counting then the drunk uncle.
Yeah, perfect, exactly, right? I try not to use that one too much. I'm sure I'm going to offend some people, but that's a good way of thinking about it.
So I've used that one analogy to people before. Talking was like, your coked up uncle that comes in. He's a lot of fun, but sometimes you got enough.
Yeah, exactly. You got to keep him in his box, right? But that's a good way of thinking about it. I mean, the right side is super powerful, but the problem is most people never learn to use the left at all. They never feel this post-up move. Most of my students, we've done like almost 80,000 swing reviews now, right? And out of 80,000 swing reviews, probably 75,000 look like this at impact. This left side's just beat up by the right. And so that's why you hear me emphasize the left so much, even though the right side still has a really important job to do. I just see it get overused so much that it's skewed the way that I present the content on the site because I see the vast majority of my people not using the left side correctly. So
one thing you said that I've never heard before was talking about the belt buckle almost going down. I've never thought of that before. So getting back, it almost feels like it's down there. And then right to the left side's easier.
Exactly.
Versus, it's almost like you said, the right side's doing okay, but the left side's not moving. So it's almost like they both have to go together. And I like that, maybe feeling like it kind of goes down a little bit, even steepen it up a little bit.
Yeah, it makes it so much easier to shift to the left because you're literally just kind of using gravity to fall onto that side because your pelvis is already tilted downhill. So why not use gravity to help make this shift automatic and create more load on that left side, right? And if you're understanding how to use that vertical force, then it makes a lot of sense to do that. But a lot of people don't think about vertical force at all. They don't understand it. They don't use it. That's again why I've just spent $21,000 on this thing just to make a point to help people see it, right? But most people either drive laterally really hard, that's the common one, or they just rotate. But the vertical thing is something that most people don't understand, because this whole idea of, if you push against the ground's pushing back at you. You're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Most people don't understand that, right? But when you use a force plate, you can start to see what's really happening, the forces that generate leverage into the swing. And so I think it'll help people understand that more. But in your case, for sure, starting to prioritize that, because you shift laterally great, but you don't get that rotation from the left and the vertical force from the left. And that's what I'd really like to see you focus on. Does it make sense?
It does. And then with the wedges, I probably don't even need really side help from that. I'll probably just kind of keep doing what I'm doing. But I'll try to do that what you talked about. We'll put the ball kind of a little bit back. I'm pretty square. I might have a hair open. But same thing, I guess, right? Just load the hips.
Yeah, exactly.
Levels, right?
So like on a short wedge, like we were trying to bring the flight down and knock it down a little bit, you're going to tend to be a little bit more on the left side anyway. But what most people tend to do with the wedges is they, again, either drive too hard off the right. You don't need a big weight transfer with the backswing, because we're not trying to hit them that hard. So we don't need that lateral movement and that extra force there. But we do need that braking force from the left leg. And when I say braking force, it's getting the hips to decelerate so that the arms and everything can begin to release. If you just kind of keep turning through, you don't ever get that deceleration. That deceleration happens all from the left leg. And you have to push against the ground in order to decelerate those hips and to keep to limit the rotation. Like if you look at somebody like Rory McIlroy, he does it to the extreme, where he slams on the brakes so hard. He's doing it a lot from the right too. His hip actually goes backwards as he's releasing his arms. He's actually going back a little bit, right? So, but that's a very extreme case. But in your case, like thinking about a wedge, it's good to just think about starting to practice, because you're going kind of slower, to hit these little knockdown wedges and focus on creating vertical force to push into the ground. And that'll be a great way to practice without making a big full swing. And then you'll feel how much more stable you are at impact with your wedges, which is really what you're looking for, right? You need control. Wedges are all about control. And so if you're kind of lackadaisically going through, it's very difficult to control the loft and the bottom of the swing arc. But if you're posted up and very solid at impact, then it's very easy to control all these impact alignments as you come down.
I'm kind of putting a little more weight at the lead side, just kind of taking an abbreviated swing. So I'm opening up, but I'm not transitioning my weight. You still, though, can have a little knee bend, I guess, there, and still post up the same way.
Exactly.
So I'm still using that vertical force for the wedges for the small shots.
Exactly. The one thing I will tell you on wedges, like the closer you get to the green, let's say, your 60 is going like a 90-yard club, and now you're only wanting to hit a 50 or 60-yard shot. What you'll see most tour players do when you're looking at the forces that they create, they don't do a lot of rotation with their lower body. So you don't see a lot of that rotational shear force. What you still see vertical force, but as you get closer to the green, they're starting to really quiet this lower body down, just again for accuracy and control. You don't need power. Lower body is about producing a lot of power, and the wedges, we don't need that, but you still need that stability. And as I was mentioning, it's still a good thing to practice just posting up. And as you're going back on a short wedge shot, you're going to let the left knee come forward a little bit and then just post up on it. And that'll help start train that in like a slower, smaller swing.
Got it.
Make sense?
Does.
All right, man. Any other questions for me?
No, keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate it.
All right, cool, man. All right. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Take care.